The Forgotten Warning. The great assembly hall of Centauri Prime stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal floors and soaring energy barriers that contained 1,000 different atmospheres. Representatives from over 800 species floated, crawled, swam, and walked through their designated sections, each breathing their own air while universal translators hummed with constant chatter. This was the heart of galactic civilization, where decisions affecting trillions of beings were made every cycle. High Counselor Vexahan of the Dominion Empire stood at the central podium, his 4 arms gesturing dramatically as his translated voice echoed through the vast chamber. The Dominion had ruled their sector for over 10,000 years, and Vexhan's family had held power for half that time. His crimson scales gleamed under the artificial suns that provided light for the assembly, and his black eyes swept across the gathered delegates with practiced authority. "Fellow beings of the assembly," Vexhan began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "We face a threat unlike any in our recorded history. The humans have become too powerful, too influential, and too dangerous to ignore." A wave of murmurs rippled through the chamber. The human delegation, a small group of 20 individuals in simple blue uniforms, sat quietly in their assigned section near the back. Their ambassador, Elena Rodriguez, was a middle-aged woman with gray streaks in her black hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She had spent the last 15 years building friendships across the galaxy, and her gentle diplomacy had made humanity many allies among the smaller species. In just 70 years since first contact, Vexhan continued, humans have established colonies in 43 star systems. They have formed trade alliances with over 200 species, many of whom were previously under our protection and guidance. Their technology advances at an unprecedented rate, and their population grows faster than any other spacefaring race in known history. Behind him, a massive holographic display showed human expansion across the galaxy. Green dots marked human colonies, blue lines showed trade routes, and golden connections indicated diplomatic relationships. The network was indeed vast and growing. Most concerning, Vexhan's voice grew harder, is their influence on our carefully maintained galactic order. They spread dangerous ideas about individual freedom, democratic governance, and economic equality. Species that have accepted their proper place in the galactic hierarchy for millennia are beginning to question their roles. From the far corner of the assembly, a voice as old as starlight itself spoke up. "Young Vexhan, do you know why the first law exists?" Every being in the chamber turned to look at Elder Kethvar of the Eternal Collective. The Eternals were the oldest known species in the galaxy, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form eons ago. Kethvar appeared as a shifting column of silver light, and when he spoke, reality itself seemed to listen. Vexhan's scales darkened with irritation. "The first law is ancient history, Elder, a superstition from primitive times when the galaxy was young and chaotic." "Is it?" Kethvar's voice carried harmonics that made several species unconsciously bow their heads. "The first law states, never harm the offspring of any species capable of interstellar travel, for the parents will remake the galaxy in their fury." Do you think such specific language came from superstition? "I think," Vexhan replied dismissively, "that old warnings have no place in modern discussions. The humans are not our ancestors' bogeymen. They are a practical problem requiring a practical solution." Kethavar's light flickered with what might have been sadness. The Zethkari thought the same thing 3,000 years ago. They were the most powerful empire in the galaxy then, much like your Dominion now. They encountered a species called the Meltorians, who seemed weak and overly emotional about their young. The chamber grew quieter. Some of the older species had heard fragments of this story, but most of the younger races had never learned about the Zethkari at all. The Zethkari decided to control the Meltorians by threatening what they loved most, Kethavar continued. They attacked nursery ships, destroyed schools, targeted the young. They thought it would break the Meltorian spirit and make them easier to rule. "What happened to them?" asked a delegate from one of the newer species. "The Meltorians became something else," Kethavar replied simply. "They stopped being the peaceful explorers the Zethkari had first encountered. They became the burning fleet. They did not just destroy the Zethkari Empire. They erased it so completely that most of you have never even heard their name. The survivors created the first law to ensure it never happened again. Ambassador Rodriguez stood up for the first time during the session. Elder Kethvar, are you saying the Meltorians were human ancestors? I am saying, Kethvar replied, that some patterns repeat across the galaxy. Some species, when their children are threatened, become something the universe has never seen before. Vexon slammed his primary hand against the podium. Enough ancient myths. We face a real problem with real solutions. The humans can be controlled if we act decisively. They value their families above all else. If we apply pressure to their civilian populations, they will accept reasonable limits on their expansion. The debate that followed lasted for 6 hours. Species after species voiced their opinions. The larger, more established empires generally supported Vexon's proposal. The smaller species, many of whom had benefited from human friendship and fair trade, argued against it. But in the Galactic Assembly, votes were weighted by military strength and economic power, not by population or fairness. When the final tally appeared on the Great Display, the result was clear: 1,247 votes in favor of military action against human civilian targets, 2,891 votes against. But the weighted total gave the victory to Vexon's faction by a significant margin. The decision was made. The Dominion fleet would intercept human civilian transports in the Kepler 438 system and demand compliance with new restrictions on human expansion. If the humans refused, appropriate pressure would be applied to their families. Elena Rodriguez stood as the session ended, her face pale but her voice steady. You have no idea what you're about to unleash, she said to the assembly. Humans don't respond to threats against our children the way you think we do. We don't become weaker. We become something else entirely. Vexon looked down at her with contempt. We shall see, little human. Your species has never faced the full might of a galactic empire. As the delegates began to disperse, Elder Kethvar floated over to the human section. Ambassador Rodriguez, he said quietly, I am sorry. I tried to warn them. What really happened to the Meltorians? Elena asked. They discovered that love and rage, when combined, can reshape the fundamental forces of reality, Kethvar replied. Pray that humans are different. But Elena Rodriguez was already thinking about the civilian transports in the Kepler system, about the families aboard them, about the children who were now in danger because beings who had forgotten the lessons of history had decided to repeat the greatest mistake in galactic civilization. 3 days later, the Dominion battle fleet intercepted the human refugee convoy in the Kepler 438 system. The convoy consisted of 12 massive transport ships carrying nearly 1 million human civilians fleeing from the environmental collapse of their original colony world. These were not explorers or soldiers, but families, elderly people, and children, seeking a new home among the stars. Admiral Corvex of the Dominion fleet opened communications with the lead transport ship, the UES New Dawn. Captain Sarah Chen, a veteran of Earth's merchant marine, appeared on the screen. She was a small woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Human transport. You are in violation of new Galactic Assembly regulations, Admiral Corvex announced. Turn back immediately or face the consequences. Captain Chen frowned. Admiral, we are a civilian convoy carrying refugees. We have proper documentation and clearance from the Assembly. What regulations are you referring to? Humanity has been deemed a threat to galactic stability. Your species' expansion is no longer permitted beyond your current territories. Return to your previous colony, or to Earth, immediately. That's impossible, Chen replied. Our colony world is dying. These people have nowhere else to go. There are children aboard these ships, families who have lost everything. Then perhaps, Admiral Corvex said with cold satisfaction, they should have thought of that before their species became problematic. The Dominion ships opened fire without further warning, but they did not target the engines or command centers of the human vessels. Their weapons locked onto the residential sections, the schools, the medical bays where the youngest and most vulnerable passengers were housed. The attack was precise and deliberately cruel. The UES New Dawn's hull exploded in a dozen places as energy beams punched through the civilian quarters. The ship's artificial gravity failed in sections, sending families tumbling through corridors now open to space. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, but not fast enough to save everyone. Captain Chen stood on her bridge and watched through the main view screen as the bodies of human children drifted past her window, small forms in emergency suits that had failed or been damaged in the attack. The youngest victim was only 4 years old, a little girl named Lily who had been excited about seeing the new world they were supposed to colonize. The attack lasted only 20 minutes. When it was over, the Dominion fleet withdrew, leaving the human convoy crippled in space. The final casualty count was devastating. 12,847 civilians dead, including 4,123 children. The survivors were left stranded between star systems with failing life support and nowhere to run. The news reached Earth within hours. President Marcus Webb stood before the global media, his face carved from stone, and his eyes holding something that made veteran reporters step back involuntarily. "The Galactic Assembly has made a choice," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the Earth. "They have chosen to murder our children. They believe this will make us surrender. They believe this will make us weak." He paused, and when he continued, something fundamental had changed in his voice. "They are wrong. Within 6 hours, every human colony in the galaxy began evacuating their civilian populations to protected locations. Every human ship capable of carrying weapons was recalled for emergency modifications. Most significantly, research facilities that had been working on theoretical physics suddenly found unlimited funding and presidential authority to pursue any project that could be weaponized. Dr. Amanda Foster, head of the Mars Research Institute, looked at the equations she had been working on for the past decade. They described a way to manipulate quantum fields to create effects that violated several laws of physics. She had always considered them too dangerous to test. That was before aliens had murdered human children for political reasons. She made a phone call to the President's Emergency Council. "Sir," she said, "I need to speak with you about Project Prometheus. We may have been thinking too small." Across human space, the change was visible within days. Ships that had carried families to new worlds were stripped down and rebuilt as weapons of war. Civilian factories that had produced farming equipment and children's toys retooled to manufacture armor and ammunition. But the most frightening change was in the humans themselves. The species that had been known for their laughter, their art, their endless curiosity about the universe had become something else. They moved with new purpose, spoke with new coldness, and looked at the stars with eyes that held no forgiveness. On the bridge of the UES New Dawn, now limping toward the nearest human station, Captain Sarah Chen held a photograph of little Lily, the 4-year-old who had died in the attack. The girl's parents had given her the picture before they died of their own injuries. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving a message from Earth Fleet Command." "Put it through." Admiral Rebecca Stone appeared on the screen, a woman Chen had known for 20 years. But Stone looked different now, harder, with something burning behind her eyes that Chen had never seen before. "Sarah," Stone said, "I'm sorry about what happened to your people. I want you to know that we haven't forgotten them." "What are you going to do, Rebecca?" Stone was quiet for a long moment. "We're going to remind the galaxy why the first law exists. When humanity burns the stars 6 months after the attack on the human refugee convoy, strange reports began reaching Galactic Assembly intelligence networks. Dominion military ships were disappearing without trace or explanation. Entire battle groups would vanish between star systems, leaving no debris, no distress signals, no indication of what had happened to them. Admiral Corvex, the same officer who had ordered the attack on the human civilians, stood in the command center of Dominion, Prime, the Empire's capital world. The massive holographic display before him showed a map of Dominion space, with red markers indicating missing ships and lost contact zones. "How many vessels are we up to now?" he asked his intelligence chief. 47 ships in the past month, sir. 3 entire patrol squadrons and 2 heavy cruisers. No survivors, no wreckage found. Corvex studied the pattern of disappearances. They formed a rough circle around human space, growing tighter with each incident. Are we certain it's the humans? Who else could it be, sir? The disappearances started exactly 6 months after our action against their refugee fleet. What neither Corvex nor his staff knew was that at that very moment, 3 Dominion ships were meeting their fate in the Vega system, 70 light-years from where they stood. The DS Conquest was a heavy battle cruiser, one of the most powerful warships in the Dominion fleet. Captain Zethmar had served aboard her for 8 years and knew every system, every weapon, every defensive capability. When his sensors detected a single human ship approaching, he almost laughed. "Just one ship?" he asked his tactical officer. "Yes, sir. It's not even broadcasting a designation. Looks like a modified transport vessel." Zethmar activated the main view screen and saw something that should have been impossible. The human ship appeared to be there and not there at the same time, flickering in and out of normal space like a ghost. Its hull was black as the void between stars, and it moved with a fluid grace that no ship that size should possess. "Unknown human vessel," Zethmar broadcast. "You are in Dominion space without authorization. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." The response came in perfect Dominion standard, but the voice was cold enough to freeze starlight. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Human Defense Force. You have been selected for judgment." "Judgment?" Zethmar snarled. "You dare threaten a Dominion battlecruiser with your pathetic transport?" "Admiral Corvex ordered the murder of 4,123 human children," the human captain replied. "We are here to collect payment for that debt." The Dominion ship opened fire with everything it had. Energy beams that could crack a moon in half struck the human vessel, but they passed through it as if it weren't there. Missiles that could destroy a space station exploded harmlessly against shields that operated on principles Dominion science couldn't understand. Then the human ship began to sing. It was not sound in any conventional sense, but every being aboard, the Conquest, could hear it in their bones, in their blood, in the deepest parts of their minds. The song spoke of children laughing in sunlight, of parents reading bedtime stories, of families sharing meals around warm tables. And then it spoke of those same children dying in the cold vacuum of space, torn from their parents by weapons, fired in deliberate cruelty. The Conquest's crew began to collapse, not from physical damage, but from the weight of understanding what they had participated in. The ship's artificial intelligence, a construct that had served the Dominion for centuries, began to weep electronic tears as it comprehended the magnitude of the crime its empire had committed. Captain Zethmar fell to his knees as the song showed him little Lily, the 4-year-old girl who had been excited about seeing a new world. He saw her final moments, her confusion as the ship's hull exploded around her, her last breath in the failing life support of her emergency suit. "Please," he whispered. "We were following orders." "So were the soldiers who loaded the cattle cars," Captain Vasquez replied. "So were the guards who operated the gas chambers. Orders do not absolve you of what you chose to do." The human ship extended what looked like tendrils of living darkness. They passed through the Conquest's hull without breaching it, and wrapped around the ship's core systems. Within minutes, the mighty battlecruiser was dead in space, its crew alive but broken, its weapons and engines permanently disabled. "You will drift here until a rescue ship finds you," Captain Vasquez said. "However long that takes, you will have time to think about the children you helped murder. And when you return to your homes, you will tell everyone what you have learned, that humanity remembers its dead, and that some debts can only be paid in suffering." This scene repeated itself across Dominion space and beyond. Human ships, using technology that seemed to bend the laws of physics, systematically hunted down every vessel that had participated in the attack on the refugee convoy. But they did not simply destroy their enemies. They did something far more effective. They made them understand. Dr. Amanda Foster worked in her laboratory on Mars, surrounded by equations that would have driven lesser minds to madness. The Project Prometheus team had achieved what most scientists considered impossible. They had found a way to manipulate the quantum field that connected all conscious minds in the universe. "The aliens think in terms of conquest and submission," she explained to the military advisors who visited her lab. "They understand strength and weakness, victory and defeat. They don't understand what they've awakened in us." "What exactly have they awakened?" asked General Harrison, the head of Earth's military command. Foster gestured to the swirling energy patterns contained in her experimental chambers. Love weaponized, grief given form, the protective instinct of an entire species, focused into something that can reach across space and rewrite reality. The technology she had developed didn't just affect enemy ships. It could touch the minds of entire populations, forcing them to experience the emotions of their victims. Every Dominion citizen who had cheered the attack on human civilians now felt the terror of those dying children. Every politician who had voted for the action experienced the anguish of parents watching their offspring die. The psychological impact was devastating. Dominion society began to collapse from within, as its population was overwhelmed by empathy they had never been forced to feel before. Suicide rates skyrocketed. Mental health facilities overflowed. The very foundations of their civilization, built on the subjugation of weaker species, crumbled as citizens finally understood the cost of their empire's cruelty. But humanity was not finished. On Earth, President Webb stood before the reformed United Nations, now expanded to include representatives from every human colony. The chamber was different from the old UN building. This one had been constructed with materials that didn't exist 6 months ago, using architectural principles that human engineers were still trying to understand. "The galaxy has forgotten the first law," Webb said, his voice carrying to every human settlement across known space. "They have forgotten why it exists. It is time to remind them." The plan he outlined was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Humanity would not simply defeat the Dominion Empire. They would remake the entire galactic civilization from the ground up, ensuring that no species would ever again consider children acceptable targets. Phase 1 had been the systematic dismantling of Dominion military forces. Phase 2 involved something unprecedented in galactic history: the complete restructuring of interstellar society. Human ships appeared simultaneously in every major star system. Not warships in the traditional sense, but vessels that operated as mobile factories, research stations, and diplomatic platforms. They began offering technology and aid to species that had been oppressed by the major empires, but with conditions. "Any species that accepts our assistance must agree to the new compact," announced Ambassador Rodriguez, now serving as humanity's chief diplomatic representative. Article 1. The deliberate targeting of children or non-combatants of any species is classified as a crime against consciousness itself. Article 2. Any government that commits such crimes forfeits its right to exist. Article 3. Humanity reserves the right to enforce these articles by any means necessary. The smaller species, many of whom had suffered under the boot of empires, like the Dominion for millennia, signed the compact eagerly. Suddenly they had access to human technology that could defend them against their former oppressors. Weapons that phased through shields, engines that could travel between dimensions, manufacturing systems that could create anything from raw energy. The major empires initially resisted, but their resistance crumbled quickly. How do you fight an enemy that can reach into your capital ships and turn your own crew against you? How do you maintain control when your subject species suddenly have technology that makes your fleets obsolete? Elder Kethavar watched the transformation from his chambers on the Eternal Collective's homeworld. The old galactic order was dying, being replaced by something that had never existed before, a civilization based on the absolute protection of innocence. His aide, a younger Eternal named Morthek, flickered with confusion. "The humans are not conquering in the traditional sense. They are not taking territory or demanding tribute. What do they want? They want to ensure that what happened to their children never happens to anyone else's children," Kethavar replied. "They are creating a galaxy where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them." On Dominion Prime, Admiral Korvex received the final human ultimatum. The message came from Captain Sarah Chen, the same officer whose refugee ship he had attacked 6 months ago. "Admiral," she said, her voice calm but implacable, "you have been judged and found guilty of crimes against consciousness. Your empire has been found guilty of enabling and encouraging such crimes. As of this moment, the Dominion Empire ceases to exist. You cannot simply dissolve a civilization that has existed for 10,000 years, Corvex protested. Watch us, Chen replied. Across Dominion space, human ships began broadcasting a signal that reached into the quantum field connecting all conscious minds. Every Dominion citizen experienced something that their species had never felt before, the full weight of empathy for their victims. They felt the terror of every child their empire had threatened, the anguish of every parent who had lost offspring to Dominion cruelty, the despair of every weak species that had been crushed under their boot. The psychological transformation was total. Within days, the Dominion military dissolved as soldiers refused to serve an empire they now understood to be monstrous. Government officials resigned en masse, unable to live with the knowledge of what they had enabled. The very concept of ruling through fear and intimidation became impossible when the rulers could feel the fear and pain they inflicted. In the end, the Dominion Empire died not in battle, but in a wave of guilt and remorse that swept through its entire civilization. But humanity's work was not finished. Across the galaxy, other empires that had built their power on the suffering of the weak found themselves facing the same choice: transform or dissolve. Most chose transformation, terrified of what humanity might do to them if they refused. A new galactic order emerged, one where the first law was not just remembered, but enforced, by beings who had learned through terrible experience what happened when it was broken. The Galactic Assembly was reformed with weighted voting, based on a species record of protecting children and non-combatants, rather than their military might. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her new ship, the UES Remember Them, built with technology that made the old Dominion battlecruisers look like toys. Around her neck, she wore a small pendant containing the photograph of little Lily, the 4-year-old who had died in the refugee convoy attack. Captain, her communications officer reported, "We're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Collective. They're requesting human assistance in establishing protective protocols for their nursery worlds." Chen nodded. The Zephyrians were a peaceful species that had been terrorized by the Dominion for centuries. Now, like so many others, they looked to humanity for protection. "Respond positively," she ordered, "and remind them of the new compact's requirements. Any species that harms children under our protection will face the same fate as the Dominion." Through the view screen, she could see the vast construction platforms where human engineers were building something unprecedented, a network of sentinel stations that would monitor every star system in the galaxy, watching for any sign that someone might be planning to harm innocents. The galaxy had learned its lesson. The first law was no longer an ancient warning gathering dust in forgotten records. It was the foundation of a new civilization, enforced by a species that had transformed their grief into the most powerful force the universe had ever seen. And in the schools of 1,000 worlds, children of every species learned the story of why the first law existed and what happened to those who broke it. They learned about the human children who had died in the cold of space and how their deaths had changed the galaxy forever. They learned that some things were sacred and that love, when properly motivated, could indeed reshape the stars themselves. The galaxy would never forget again.